Hello, everybody. My name is Jane. I'm from the north of England, which means I'm usually brutally honest about just about everything, and I don't mind people being rude and interrupting and that kind of thing. It's just kind of how we all are up there. But in a moment of politeness, I want to introduce my two very dear friends and colleagues, Jacob Simpson and Adrian Starnes. And Jacob and Adrian each work in the Center for Rural Engagement. They have the same role, but they work in different areas. So Jacob is our liaison in the Center for Rural Engagement, where he deals with issues of resilience in communities. And Adrian is our liaison in the equality of place area. So Adrian is most tied into the arts, although I think that all of our roles intersect and cross over really quite well. So I am going to show you what we're going to do today. I have a PowerPoint to run through, and we're actually going to have an interactive session, and we're going to end up this session all playing a different role in a community engagement process. So let's start out here and I'll just tell you a little bit about the Center for Rural Engagement. The Center's been around for a little over 2 years. Our mission is to partner with rural communities and help improve Hoosier lives. It's a pretty simple, straightforward mission, but we value collaboration, partnership, and trust. And those things are the cornerstones of what we do in our community engagement work. We want to make sure that our work has the potential to be sustained over time and can be scaled and shared amongst communities within our Southwest Central Indiana region and also beyond. But we're going to keep coming back to these issues and these values of collaboration, partnership, and trust, because without those things, community engagement is for naught. And so you'll hear me hammering those things home, hopefully, for the rest of the day. As Alan says, my role within the Center for Rural Engagement is that I run Sustaining Hoosier Communities, and it is a large-scale applied teaching opportunity where we partner with one community for an academic year. The community tells us all the things that they would like some help with, all the things that they'd like for us to focus on, and then we match courses and students to community projects. And we are the largest program that focuses on rural initiatives within our professional organization, which is called EPIC-N. And we were fortunate in 2019 to be awarded the Outstanding Program of the Year award. And since we started, you can see our numbers there. We've done countless hours of student work. We've engaged almost 2,000 students in our work, and those students all work on projects that the community themselves has identified. And again, that's back to our whole sense of collaboration. So what we're going to talk about today in our presentation is we're going to talk about three main pieces of information, three main frameworks, and those are asset-based community development, appreciative inquiry, and strategic doing. And those are the ways in which we as an organization in the center, and also the way that we run our Sustaining Hoosier Communities initiative, we use these three things to basically form the core of how we do our community engagement. So we're going to start out really trying to dig into what these frameworks mean and how we utilize them in the field. And then we're actually going to do an application. We're all going to play together. We will be introduced to the mythical land of Moreland, which is a mythical town in Southwest Central Indiana. And you will all play a role in helping the town to work on a particular concern that they have raised. And then we'll have some time for Q&A after that. But I do want to let you know that we need to kind of buckle up and really get ready, because going through these three different frameworks, there's a lot of ground to cover. I fully encourage you, if you have questions along the way, to put them in the chat box, and then Adrian and Jacob are going to make sure that I don't forget to answer them. And we'll make sure that we keep things ticking along. And our goal is at 2:15 to get into doing the role play. Everybody okay with that?
Yeah.
Alex, a thumbs up. I appreciate that. You're the only one I can see right now. Oh, Elizabeth gave you one too. Thank you. All right, so let's get going. So asset-based community developments in practice, this is the way we engage with our communities, is by doing asset-based community development. And we're going to explain what assets are and why they're essential and important to the way that we do our work. But one of the things that we do is that we utilize the same framework, but we utilize it in different ways depending on how we're working with a community. And so if we're just trying to build a relationship with the community, we'll try to get broad representation to try to understand what the community is about. We'll do some asset mapping. So we'll do some recording of what the community says their assets are. We will also maybe come back to our campus and do some asset mapping of our own resources on campus to really figure out what is it that, that we have to offer that we can help communities with. We will then try to link together the assets that the community has, the assets we have on campus, put them together in unique ways, and then try to create something interesting and new to help the community. If we're going to examine a specific community concern, so we're not just sort of like, hey, let's get to know you, but if a community's approached us and said, which happens, how do we do this specific thing in our community? We start out in the same way, broad representation, get as many people at the table as possible, and preferably in all of the ways that you could interpret this, people who do not look like you. So people who are not, you know, either they're not professionals or they're not women in my case, or they're not white in my case, but trying to get the broadest sense of representation possible. We'll do the same things. We'll look at the community's assets. We'll link and leverage the assets that they have. We'll come up with the community to develop a project. And then again, we'll start to really think about what we can do to support them. But the onus there is not on building a relationship between the campus and the community, but it's really getting the community to take the lead and to take on the project with a little bit of our assistance. So same model, but applied in slightly different ways. So what do we mean when we say asset-based community development? Well, it's a very, very broad area. And if you look at the literature, there's hundreds of authors who work in this way, and it's a very loose frame. There are lots of things that fit into asset-based community development. There's no one asset map. There's no one methodology. It's quite open-ended. So really it is sort of figuring out what works best for you in your circumstance and in your context. But the core of it is uncovering the assets within a community so that the work that you do in the community depends on those assets, is supported by those assets. You're not constantly looking for things from the outside world. And that will then over time enable the sustainability of whatever the initiative is that you're working on. So I know that for many of us who work with communities, the first thing when you say to a community is, what do you need? They'll all say $1 million, more time, more people, right? And that's a deficit mindset. That cues people into thinking about like what they don't have. And what's really central to asset-based community development is focusing on what communities have. And it has, as a set of principles, there are 3 key principles that underpin asset-based community development. Every community has gifts. Those gifts can be in place, they can be in people, they can be in specific things within a community, they can be in history, they can be in tradition, but every community has gifts. Every person in a community has something that they can contribute. There is no one in a community that doesn't have something that they can give. The role of the facilitator is to uncover what it is that people have to give. And then everybody is actually passionate enough about something to be called to action at some point, if only you can discover what that is and put it in front of them. So those are the 3 key elements. Every community has gifts, everyone can contribute, and everyone is passionate enough that if the issue is presented in a way that it hits on their passion point, they will leap to action. So that seems like, oh, it's really simple. Well, the hard part is to uncover all of those things and then to lay them out within the community. The way that we approach all of the work that we do in asset-based community development uses this frame, this analytical frame that you'll see there in blue of appreciative inquiry. And appreciative inquiry is what the opposite of what we were just talking about with this deficit mindset. Community engagement happens through, whether they're right now virtual or, you know, heretofore they had been, you know, in person. But community development happens through conversation and it happens through interaction. And if you can guide the frame of interaction, that's the way the conversation flows is going to be guided by the frame that you use. So if we all start out by saying, what do you need? Or what would be helpful for you to have? We will all, because of human nature, go to the things that we don't have, which then brings us back to the idea of like, we need money, we need time, we need more people. But if you look at communities and you work with communities and you start thinking about what we can do together, what could we do together, where can we go together, you've got to start to think about what works well. What's already, name a thing that works well in your community. Why does that work so well? Let's replicate that. So by focusing on what works, not looking at just what's broken, and doing that together, the analytical frame for appreciative inquiry has these 4 Ds that they focus on, which is let's discover something together, let's dream about the future, let's design a way to get there, and then let's deliver a product. But again, it's a very similar frame that asset-based community development, because it starts out with getting people together and thinking about the future and basing that on what you already have, on what's working and what works well in your community. The last thing we're going to talk about today is strategic doing. Strategic doing is actually a set of rules, if you will. Rules always sound so bad to me. I don't know. I'm a bit of a rule breaker myself, but it's a procedural frame. So there are 10 rules or principles within strategic doing that basically just help you to guide and frame a conversation. And we do know that without guidance, conversations can kind of like become chaotic and projects can become chaotic. We all need some elements of guidance. The nice thing about strategic doing is that the guidance that it offers is all about maintaining a sense of collective impact and collective input. So it's not about one person doing the project, it's about everybody taking a part in it. It's not about one person's vision, it's about everybody coalescing around a vision and making things happen. So those 10 different rules about strategic doing are basically broken down into 4 sections. What could we do? What should we do? What are we gonna do? And how are we gonna get it done? That's it. It's just like the 10 rules are broken into those 4 questions of what could we do? What should we do? Where are we going and how are we going to get it done? It's pretty simple. So what you'll see from this is like those things just they just merge together over time. So for us, we sort of flow seamlessly from asset-based community development, using an appreciative frame, applying strategic doing, thinking again about what the assets are. And it's a very iterative circular process that you're kind of always moving around in that sphere. The reason that we kind of came up with, we felt the need to sort of write this stuff down for ourselves is really because of this particular framework that I was exposed to a few years ago. And it's not exactly a new framework, but this is the Ladder of Citizen Participation that was written by Lee Arnstein, a woman, in 1969. And for me, this is the most basic way for me to get a gut check on what I'm doing, whether or not whether I'm doing things in the right way. So what we see in this is a ladder of sort of like increasing meritorious ways of operating in the universe. And when we think about our partnerships with communities and community development, we want to be on this higher order plane of participation. So when you look at this ladder, you'll start down at the bottom with manipulation and therapy. And so this was written in higher education, so it's written from that community university framework. And manipulation and therapy is that the university doesn't really care about the community. They're just like, well, we need to go study a thing, so we're coming to study you. So when you think about this, like the non-participation is on the part of the community. They're not participating at all in this. And if you can think about things like the Tuskegee experiments that were done by the military on airmen, this is exactly that. It's like, you're here, we need to study it. We're going to use you as our guinea pigs in the worst possible way. And we do not want at all to be accused of doing any of that. The next sort of line, the next rungs up the ladder are this idea of tokenism, where the university says, yeah, sure, we're going to come in the community and do some study, or we're going to do some work, we'll consult with you. And they sort of pay lip service to the fact that they're going to work with the community, but they don't really do very much of that. The community becomes a client in the process, but they're not really an equal partner. There's very much a power dynamic that's going on between the university and the community understands that in the pecking order, they're sort of lower down in the rungs. And again, it doesn't make for a healthy relationship. It doesn't make for sustained relationship over time. And so what we're looking to do is to always move up in this hierarchy to the top level. And what we're trying to do, Arnstein really wanted to give her expertise and the way that she would do things and give it to communities, which is why at the very top it's citizen control. That the citizenry understands over time that they can just take over the project and they can do it for themselves. They have the wherewithal, they have the assets, they have the people, they can do it for themselves. So what we're always making sure with our communities is we start no lower down on the rung than partnership. So that's a very big word for us in everything that we do. We partner with communities. We don't work in communities. We don't do anything for communities, but we partner with communities. So for us, in the way that I do my work with Sustaining Hoosier Communities, we have a really robust community coordinating committee in the community. If we have ideas that come up that haven't come directly from the community, we have to run them by that community coordinating committee, get their input, get them to shape those ideas before we take any next steps. So we're constantly have a back and forth with that coordinating committee so that we're getting the community voice be present in what we're doing. Ultimately, we want to delegate responsibility out to that community. And so we do that through our coordinating committee where they ultimately start making decisions on things. It's up to them to tell us whether they have a concern about something. They need to feel that they can come to us and say, hey, this isn't going well. Or, so if you think about further down the rungs, a community wouldn't go to the university and say, oh, there's a problem here. But that's what we're trying to make sure that we have an equal partnership, that the community's also got responsibility, they've got skin in the game, and it's real. If they want to pull the plug on something, that's up to them and they can do it, and we will work with that because this becomes really important. Getting to citizen control in our line of work is really tough because a lot of times the assets that we're talking about, there are assets in the community, but there are equally assets in the university. So we can't necessarily give those assets away. And so fully controlling certain projects is possible in certain places, but not necessarily in all of the work that we do. But again, this for me is just a gut check every time, like, really working at partnership. Am I doing anything less than that? And if it's less than that, it's not acceptable. So when we talk about asset mapping, hopefully you kind of have a sense in your mind about what we mean by assets. And assets are pretty much anything that exists within a community. And so this happens to be the asset map that we developed in our work because these different collectives of collections of assets, these different groupings are what we work with most frequently in community. And we didn't just, sit down one day and go, oh yeah, there they are, there's 10 of them. It took us a long time to come up with this list. It took a lot of different iterations to really figure out how we engage in our communities and where we do our work. But it's important to have some kind of framework that is shared between you and the community. And so this asset map for us gives us a frame. It also gives us an opportunity to examine where we're doing work and where we're not doing work. Like, why have we got nothing going on in housing? Why have we got nothing going on in leadership? Is that because we don't have enough resources on our end, or we don't have enough assets on our end? Or is that because there's a scarcity of assets in the community? But this gives a common language between both community and university to kind of share an understanding of what we're working on and how we're getting that work done. But what we mean by assets is pretty much anything that exists in the community that's positive, that is helpful. So the four main kind of categories that you can start with are natural assets, social assets, maybe skills, and capital. And capital doesn't necessarily only mean money, it usually does, but it can, there can be other forms of capital. So I encourage you to start thinking about what different kinds of assets you would think about wanting to see or wanting to tap into in your work, and how you would name those, and then how you would go about collecting, getting the information from communities to understand the lay of the land. So like it says here, this is a very simple quadrant plan of how to get started, but we made one way more complicated, perhaps more complicated than it needed to be, but I've seen more complicated than what we came up with. But assets, so if you look at our thing down here, health and wellness. Do you have hospitals, clinics, doctors, nurses? Are there agencies who do aftercare? Is there stuff going on to help with elderly folks, getting care? What about folks with chronic illness? Are there places where they can go get monitoring for diabetes or blood pressure? So that's what we're kind of tapping into. Admittedly, some of these things are really easy to fill out. So we have down here the recreation, arts and culture section. And this is the first section that people complete routinely when they fill out the asset map. And that's because everybody recreates. People might go to work in different places, but everybody understands how they spend their free time. And they all have things that they really enjoy about how they spend their free time. So this could be a venue, a tradition, like a 4th of July parade. It could be a specific, like the Persimmon Festival, but it also could be a bike trail, a walking trail, a hiking path, a lake, a wood that people go for a hike in. It could be a shared history whether, there are folks who get together for a music jam at the Paoli Lost River Market in Delhi. Probably they used to get together every week, and they would do kind of a traditional music jam. But what's going on in the community that people really love? The reason people fill this out a lot more quickly than the other ones is this is what they love to do in life. This is their passion. They go to work, but this is what this is what thrills them. So I think if we were ever to make any adjustments to our asset map, we would break apart some of these pieces that are collected in here. So I think hopefully you've got a sense of what we mean by assets. If you have any questions, please do throw them up in the chat box, and we'll try to get to those questions. So we've done asset maps, and so what are the pitfalls with asset maps? Because okay, so we've got an asset map. What does that mean? Are they trustworthy? Are they worth doing? Are they worth our time or not? So the first thing to recognize is that an asset map is just a single snapshot in time. So you're not going to see progress unless you asset map and then asset map again. And I don't really know what the point would be of that. They're not definitive, right? They're just like, at this moment in time, these people sitting around a table came up with this list of assets in the community. Assets can also reside in multiple places. So let's say we talk about an employer who also is a utility service provider. Do you put them in utilities or do you put them in employment? Well, that would depend on the person who was filling that out. If they provided their utility, they would put them as a utility provider. If they paid their wage, they might list them as an employer. Doesn't sort of matter, but for people who like things very cleanly to fit into boxes, asset maps can be kind of messy. If you have a big hole in an asset map, a big gap where no one's written anything, it can reflect not having the right people at the table, or it can perhaps reflect a lack of understanding of what you're asking them, or it could be that really it does take a special kind of expertise. And so one of our areas is housing, and housing is always an area where we get very little written on our maps. Because for most of us, if I said, you tell me about housing in your community, you would put something about where you live, right? Your apartment or your house. And you might know about a retirement community, but you're not necessarily going to know about new housing developments, what Habitat for Humanity is doing, whether the town is trying to do, like a low-income housing project or multiplexes, or you're probably not going to know. But if I went to the mayor's office and ask somebody in the mayor's office, tell me about housing, they'd fill up that chart. And so this again gets us back to this idea that we have to recognize who's actually in the room. Who did we invite? Do they know what we know, or do they know different things than what we know? So again, it gets you to really think critically about how you're bringing people to the table and who you're bringing. Assets. The map itself doesn't tell you very much. You have a nice list of things, but without the local context, without local knowledge to fill in the stories, then you've got like, oh, this particular building is an asset. Well, it is, you don't know why. So there's another step that comes after asset mapping, and that's asking questions. Why is this important? Why did you write this down? So a lot of sort of qualitative analysis happening here. And if assets are going to be used in your projects, then the people who own them have to be willing to let you use them. So if we have really great assets listed, but the owner themselves has zero interest in either sharing their asset or giving up some control of their asset for the betterment of the group or the group's initiative, then you're dead in the water. You know about the asset, but it's not available to you, then you basically have to consider it sort of like not being there as an asset. And that can get tricky in some projects, but This is about the community's will, and naysayers are part of that, right? So you can try and talk folks around, but at the end of the day, if the community will is no, they respect it and help the community to move on to something that people can get behind. So why do we bother with asset mapping, given we know that there are these pitfalls? It really does help us to build a trusting link. And one of the reasons for that is that people, human nature is people love to talk about themselves. And when you're talking to a community about what's good in their community, it's a really different frame. And it's not something that people tend to do much thinking about. Why do you live in this town? Well, I was born here. Well, what's good about it? Oh, I don't know. And, you know, it's going to be hard sometimes to get people to dig in. But this asset mapping is very neutral in the way that we get people to reflect on things. And we get them to do it in large groups, and they talk to their, you know, their friends and neighbors sitting around tables. But it really does help communities to understand, like, that they have stuff that's really awesome right there at their fingertips, things that they've forgotten about. We've gotten folks getting into arguments about whether or not a specific asset is contained within their geographic region or not. Yeah, that's in the next county over. No, it's not. Like pulling out Google Maps to prove that they own the asset, right? That it's part of their community. That's cool, because that's getting folks to really become invested in their own sense of self. And I do think that many of us don't have that about our communities. We are not immune from that. You know, there's no sort of us and them in this. All of us, you know, behave in this way. The idea of storytelling that comes out of asset mapping is huge. Asset mapping gives people an opportunity to dig into narratives around their own towns. We did a lot of work in Lawrence County with the Avoca Fish Hatchery. And the more people we talked to in the community, the more people told me that, oh, I have my engagement pictures taken there. It's so pretty. And oh, we used to go sneak onto the property late at night when it was closed because we just kind of wanted to hang out, right? All these stories that get generated. You're never going to get into that. You're never going to get into that level of connection with community members if all you do is do like a demographic survey of like, this is the population, these are their ages, this is the kind of places that they work. This allows you for people to tell you their stories, and that's how you connect, and that's how you build trust. But it takes time. You have to listen first. And you have to also honor the fact that the community's own words about things are the words that you need to start using. If the community refers to things in a specific way, then that's how you need to start referring to them over time too. It is about understanding the way that they see themselves and they want to be seen, and not necessarily how you see them. So what we do in our work is we go from this asset mapping process, and we do this with communities in big meetings, and this is one such blurry meeting that you can see in the background there. And then we start to work with communities around, okay, so you have these assets, what do you want to do with them? Like, where do you see the future going? And this is when we get into this idea of appreciative inquiry. So this is where we start using those tools to imagine a shared future and imagine how these assets would contribute to that shared future. So when we do appreciative inquiry, it's all based around sort of trying to create a framing question of a shared future. And this was a very, very general, they usually framing questions usually much more specific than this. This is a very general question we had in Greene County. So imagine that Greene County has partnered with Indiana University to enhance its unique economic, natural, physical, human, and cultural assets, which means we need to know what all of those are, right? What would those successes look like? So we're asking them to hold in their brain what the assets are, imagine a shared future that those assets create something successful. How do we get from point A to point B? And so, you know, what we're trying to do is to, oops, sorry, I'll go back a slide here, not too far. So what we're trying to do is to get people to hold this idea of what they hold dear and then think of its use in the future. That's a tough pivot for a lot of folks. And I'll give you an example. We were working in Washington County, and there's a playground that used to be used very frequently, and it's sort of fallen into disrepair a bit. It's kind of place where it's like, in the 70s, I would have gone on those swings, but you know, today's children wouldn't be put on that swing set, right? Because they don't look, it doesn't look particularly safe, maybe. And so we say to the community, well, what do you want? They're like, well, we've got a park. That's an asset. Okay, well, what do you want to do with it? What's a success story that you'd like to see out of this? Well, we'd like it to have new equipment. We'd like to have a new swing set. Why? You have to be able to answer that why question. What is it about getting a new swing set that propels you into this future state of success? Is getting the swing set a success characteristic, or is it something else? And then the narratives come in. Well, the park used to be a place we could go hang out as kids, and the kids don't go there anymore. And our parents used to go and our grandparents used to go, and they don't go anymore. And then you get to the narrative of, I would like the park to be a place in our town where everybody can go and everyone can feel safe, and that we should have safe equipment for everybody for the kids to play on, and benches for grandma to sit on, right? And that's a very different project than simply saying, we need a new swing set, because you've then created a vision that everybody in the community who's involved in that project understands that they're trying to create a new cultural way of being in their town, which might harken back to something that they've done in the past, but it will include a swing set, but that's not the be all and end all. What they're trying to get to is a sense of intergenerational connectivity and community. And so pushing on those questions and coming back to that framing question of, this has a future orientation of positivity. What does that look like to you? Paint that picture. And as soon as people start to adopt that mindset and that way of doing things, and other people can see a version of the same thing. They may see slightly different versions, but they see themselves in that shared future. And that's what gets people motivated. That's what gets people on board and excited to go to the next thing. So, ladies and gents, we have just whipped through asset-based community development and appreciative inquiry. Now we're going to get into strategic doing. So you'll notice that strategic doing, it says strategic doing and not strategic planning, because the emphasis is on the do word. So I just want to give a shout out to strategic doing. If you see this logo online, that is the official strategic doing logo. I happen to be certified in strategic doing. It's something that we believe strongly in our work that is helpful. And we have a few other folks in our office who've been certified in strategic doing, and it's a great set of tools to really dig into. But what strategic doing is, in a nutshell, these things on the left-hand side of the screen. It's to create strategic vision and action, not separate from one another, because a strategic plan, you write it, you put it on the shelf, and then you go, oh, now we should do it. Well, we're writing it and doing it pretty much at the same time when we do strategic doing. It involves networks of individuals. It's not one group, but the networks are across different institutions, geographic areas, different parts of life. So it's not just like the university is doing it. It's like everybody's involved in it. It's aligned towards commonly shared outcomes. So it's not some hierarchical top down, this is what we're going to do, everybody needs to get on board. It's about creating that vision together. And it's about having these group of people move together in a dynamic fashion to get to that set of complex goals. You do not solve simple problems with strategic doing. If you can apply a technical fix to something, that's not strategic doing. Strategic doing is for tackling complex problems where you don't know the answer, then you start. So it is not hierarchical. It is not housed in a single person or a single institution. It's not rigid and unresponsive to change. And it's not limited to simply the planning without actually doing the action. It's this hybrid model of all these things. So it's again, you know, when you see this, how does it work? It starts by building trust over time. Now, what does that sound like, right? That sounds exactly like asset-based community development, and it sounds exactly like appreciative inquiry, like let's come together to discover something. So networks come together and they learn to understand what their goals are. They explore different ways of being successful. They coalesce, they collaborate, they innovate. And then what they come up with is a solution that no one individual at that table would ever have thought of on their own. Because what it's doing is it's pulling together multiple assets and smushing them into a new recipe. So you're going to come out with a different baked good at the end of it. The positive frame that is referred to in strategic doing is appreciative inquiry. How convenient, because we've just learned about that. And that helps us to focus our work. And so it helps the group to move forward and not lose sight of where they're going or why they're going in that direction. It helps frame those conversations and keeping the solutions, keeping everything focused on solutions rather than looking for new and different problems. And in the strategic framework guidebook and the way that we do this, the team members are guided by the process to work, and they're working together. There's no one coming in and saying, oh, you're not doing that correctly, or they're self-monitoring, but the framework is allowing them to keep everything moving forward so they don't get into some weird chaotic point of view where they're just like, we have a million ideas, because how many of us have been in those meetings where everybody has a brilliant idea, but we don't get anything done, right? We're trying to take the hierarchy out of this, but we're also trying to get to action. And so the framework just provides us this sort of balance of let's continue to get to action. So like I said in the beginning, there are 4 major questions that strategic doing asks, and they do that through these 10 different rules. But the strategic doing questions are, what could we do? So given the challenge that we face, what are the activities and resources we could use to meet that challenge? What should we do? So from all of these different, many opportunities that we could choose, which one or which ones are the best ones right now for us to pursue? What makes the most sense for us to move forward? What's the right thing? Then what are we going to do? We've decided on that. Okay, let's set out some short-term goals. Let's piecemeal that project into something that's got chewable bites. And then we're going to set up what they call 30-30s, which are just basically intervals of time, 30 days at a time. You can do 2 weeks, you can do a week, but usually it's 30 days at a time where we've all come together, we've decided on our action plan, we're going to go away and do it, and in 30 days, we're going to come back again, and we're going to talk about what did we do, and where are we going in the next 30 days. So you've constantly got this motivation where everybody is involved in the process of getting things done. So the same people who decided what they should do in the future are the ones who are getting things done. And we always talk in strategic doing about setting a limit. On everybody has everybody's equal. There's no there's no princesses in the room. Everybody has to be a doer. There's no just sitting around and being an observer. There's equity of voice where everybody's voice is considered equally and evenly. And if one person dominates the conversation, someone will remind them that like we haven't heard from other people. But this whole idea of constantly going out and reporting back, we just really say, what can you get done in an hour this week? That's it. What can you do in an hour this week that can help to get towards, get us on the road towards completing this project? So again, those guides and those frameworks help it from becoming completely chaotic or one person feeling like they're carrying the whole load for the whole world, because everyone's sharing the burden in a pretty equitable way. These are the 10 rules. We don't have to go through them, but you can see that they're color coded in the what should we do, what could we do, what should we do, what are we going to do, and then how are we getting it done. But the first one that I think is really important for us, I want to point this one out, is create and maintain a safe space for deep, focused conversations. That's trust, right? That is trying desperately to find a way to build trust within a partnership that you're creating. And that is, like I said, it is the first piece of asset-based community development. It is the first piece of appreciative inquiry, and it's the first piece of strategic doing. It is the most important part of all of this work that we do together. So you can see that we're constantly going back to these 4 questions, and even when we do a 30-30 and we have reported it back out on what we get done this week, we're going back into those questions. Okay, so what should we do next? How are we going to get that done next? Who's going to do what? How will we know if we're being successful? And we reiterate those same questions over and over again. So you can see here, you start with a meeting, and then all the players go out and they do their part, and then they come back in 30 days for another meeting. And then they go out and they do their part, and they come back and they report on it. And there's one of the rules, the final rule of strategic doing is nudging, and you appoint a nudger in your unit, and it's somebody usually who has great skill sets around organization. They just remind people gently, hey, it's 2 weeks, before our next meeting. Have you gotten started on that work? Hey, it's been 3 weeks, and you said you were going to contact Anthony, and he hasn't heard from you. So where are you on that? Just shout out if you need help. But you got to have somebody who's keeping everybody, because we all need our feet to be kept to the fire, right? Keeping the process going. But what's nice about this is it gives people 2 modes of operation. You've got your doing mode where you're out there and actively doing stuff, and you've got your thinking mode. And we have to recognize that some of us operate better in one than the other, right? I'm much better at coming up with a grandiose idea. If you told me I had to go and implement it, well, I'm not very good at that. But Jacob, who's my colleague, he is really good at taking a grandiose idea and making it in bite-sized chunks and making it something that's achievable. And so what makes us really good partners, because we complement one another really well. And this is a nice thing for us to see here, that people are able to take on work that is in their wheelhouse rather than being obligated, oh, well, you've got this chunk of the strategic plan, you need to go figure this out. Maybe I'm not good at that. Strategic doing allows people to play with their strengths over and over. So this, I know, looks horribly complicated, but it's really not. But I want to just reference the fact that strategic doing only works because what we're doing is leveraging networks. So we start by talking about assets, but assets also include people, and assets mostly are owned by people, right? And so what we're really talking about when we're thinking about strategic doing is what is the interplay of people, the networks that they have, and how do we expand beyond the network we started with in our core group to include other networks? Because this is how we get the best work done in community. Is not to think that like, well, we were a team of 8 to start with and we will forevermore be a team of 8. No, we want a team of 8 to become a team of 16, to become a team of 64. We want to keep expanding, expanding the network outwards. So what we have here in this picture is, you could imagine this little green solid circle as being like the core group of folks who come together to do strategic doing. They come together around a project, and you might consider yourself perhaps to be the central hub. You might be the one who was like, hey, I've got this great idea if we could just get a group of people together. And so you might be the originator and the hub therefore for this entire project, but you've got a team of trusted people around you who are also totally on board and really invested. They also have people that they're connected to. And so once you get sort of beyond 1 degree out, you've got this sort of like big porous boundary of networks. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to push through the boundaries here and try to make sure we find ways to connect outwards. So then we have these folks who we consider boundary spanners. So they may be a really good connection into your core group, but they also have another core group that they're a part of. So there's another person who's a hub who holds together like a really big network. You've got a person who's a boundary spanner who's part of both, maybe tangentially, but part of both networks. And what we're trying to do in strategic doing is continue to build that network outwards. It allows us to do our job over time by pulling people in and giving people a break, right? If people are constantly doing, sometimes things come up in life and they can't do so much. So it gives us a sense of renewal. It also brings more assets to the table, and bringing assets to the table means coming up with new and different solutions for things, and really kind of generative ideation. So I want to just have you to keep this in your minds, that when you start thinking about the work that you're doing in communities, you've got to think about keeping expanding that horizon of networks and colleagues and friends and new friends you haven't made yet, and all the things that they bring with them. So what is strategic doing best at? And it's best at tackling big ideas. We talked about this very briefly, but what strategic doing really focuses on is this idea of adaptive challenges. So if a problem is meaty and chewy and you can't figure it out in a day and you just sit there going, I have no clue how we would do this, that's probably a strategic doing problem. So these two here under the technical challenges, these two examples. So a hospital is having trouble recruiting nurses. There's a career center. The career center says, you know what, we'll just offer a CNA certificate and in high school, and then we'll have high school graduates who are ready to go into the nursing field. Great. That's a technical solution to a problem. We sort of know what we need to do. We don't have enough nurses, we need to get more nurses. We have a pathway in our community to do that. It's not really a strategic doing question. The ones that are on the right are sort of more of those adaptive problems because they need more people than exist, more people who to come to the table than actually sort of would commonly be the ones that you would call upon. So how do we assure that all third graders are reading at or above the third grade level? I don't know, make them read. I mean, you know, it's like, how do you do that? How do you actually get that done? There isn't a simple solution. There isn't only one way of doing it. And it's going to not just involve teachers. So the nursing problem just involved the hospital and training and the high school, right? That's a pretty easy fix. Making sure kids are reading at the third grade level is going to involve the school, it's going to involve parents, it's going to involve extended families, it's going to involve maybe some technologies. I mean, I would consider books a technology perhaps, but you know, it's going to take more stuff than simply like making a linear connection. So if you think of problems that are like really amorphous and don't have an easy pathway through them, those are going to be the things that will work well with strategic doing. But what comes to the, you know, what comes to the core in all of this is like, how do you frame if you're trying to do what asset-based community development says, which is everyone has assets and everyone has something to give, and that everyone can be compelled to do something that they're passionate about, we're trying to create a framework that presents a picture to people so they can be like, oh man, I want to help with that thing. And that's where this framing of the challenge, that big framing question becomes really, really important. And so we have to constantly, you know, we had that very simple one for Greene County. It was like, imagine if we've been partners and we've had an impact on all of these things that you have in your community. What does success look like? That's a framing question. That's like framing the challenge that we're all working on together. But we want to make sure that we're sort of creating a generative question. So it's not just like, how do we solve this problem? Because that doesn't really float people's boats, right? That doesn't get people very excited. So we're really trying to make sure that what we're putting together in this framework is we're trying to come up with a new way of doing something that is positive for us in the future. So this is a great example down here. So, you know, if organizations, and we all face this, like, what's our culture? What does it look like to work here? Is that what we're trying to do? So, you know, you could spend hours interviewing people about what they think the culture is, and is that what they want the culture to be? You could just say, like, we want to create a new culture for this organization. Let's shape that together, rather than sort of imposing a view of what the culture, they think the culture might be and how we're all failing because we're not meeting that. It's like, let's just all get together and create a new culture for the organization. Again, a big question that brings people together that doesn't have an easy answer. So again, complex challenges is sort of like what we're doing. We're going to design the next thing, create the next future. And this is then what becomes the framework that keeps us on task in everything that we do in strategic doing. You know, it says down here, it becomes our North Star, and it absolutely does. You can be in a really great conversation about, oh my God, we could do this thing and get this asset and all these people involved. And it's like, yeah, but we're not here to solve that problem. We're here to solve this specific thing right here. We're working on this specific idea or new future. So it really does help us to not generate into some kind of, well, it helps to reduce the amount of tangents we spin off into, and it really keeps us focused on where we're going. So there's an art to framing these questions, these guiding questions. And the four that are listed here in red are really the big ones that we want to think of. Is it surprising? Like, is the question that you ask surprising so that people go, huh, like, oh, I never thought about it in that way. Does it touch people's hearts? Does it touch their spirit? One of the things that we know about the work that we do in Southwest Central Indiana is that most everybody, when we ask them what they hope for the future for their community, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about healthcare, sustainability, it doesn't matter if we're talking about music, arts, traditions. Everybody says the same thing. I want this community to matter so that when my kids are grown, it's an important place for them. That touches the heart and spirit, right? Nobody's going to argue with that. So not everything, of course, can come back to children, but you need to find that thing that, again, allows people's brains to go into that storytelling, that narrative, like, I see myself in that future. I understand why that future is important. So that storytelling also then prompts this idea of building relationships. And that takes us back to this whole idea of networking. Who else is going to be interested in doing this? Who else will want to join in this effort? And then also, does it force us to look at a situation a little bit differently? So we're going to see that in the example we have when we do our role play, about how we reframe a situation and really see it with a new lens. So I got a couple of things here. We might just take a couple of minutes just to think through these, and I encourage you to chime in, but these are what we consider problem-centered questions. These are the things that, like, something is wrong. And then this side would be where we would put our appreciative questioning. So, problem. Why are so many kids dropping out of high school? Well, I don't know. You know, immediately if you read that, unless you're an expert in education or in child well-being, you know, maybe child psychology, do you feel like you could answer that question? Like, I wouldn't be able to answer that question. But could you answer the question, what would it look like if dropping out of high school was a rare exception in our schools? I think I might be able to contribute something to that, because I think I might be able to contribute. But that, to me, conveys a sense of excitement, kids wanting to be in school. Why would they want to be in school? Well, you know, because we've made it a really cool place to go. So there's already a sense that even as somebody who doesn't have children, I feel like I could contribute to the appreciative question in a way that the problem-centered question, it sometimes makes you feel like it's not my problem. So I don't want to get involved, right? But the appreciative question makes you think like, oh, I could maybe be helpful in that area. So there's a question on here. Why are our liberal arts admissions shrinking? Again, I'm teaching the liberal arts. I used to, but I don't anymore. I could give you 100 reasons, and we could talk about how budgets are terrible at the university, blah, blah, blah. But again, does it really compel me to want to participate in this specific problem solving? So we could be like, imagine if Indiana University was known as a mecca for the liberal arts across the Big Ten. What would that look like? Then all of a sudden it's like, oh crap, we could do that. Oh, that's a possible future that I've never thought of for myself. Like maybe I could get on board with that. So there's a great one down here. Why didn't we get that grant? Because we suck. Because people just don't understand us, right? There's 100 different things you can come up with, but then none of them is positive. What would it look like if this organization was so active that people fell over themselves to give us grants, right? You got to reframe it. Like, what does it take to reframe that question so that it comes out with a positive end? Can the old theater be saved? Imagine if the old theater became the hub of downtown Bloomington. What would that look like? Right? And now you've imagined a new future for the theater. You've just in a very simple set of words, you've involved the theater as being a cornerstone of community in a downtown setting. Like your brain can go 100 different directions with that. So that's the art, I think, of this kind of work is this piece right here. This is the thing that's going to get people motivated, get them to want to be involved, and really kind of get them to want to dig in to helping, right? We've gone away from that somebody else's problem to, boy, I'd really like to be involved in that solution. That's a really different way of being.